I have a question for you. How many humans do you think have ever existed in all of human history? From 500,000 years ago, 300,000, depending on who you ask, since we have been anatomically modern humans, how many humans do you think have ever existed? Well, the true answer turns out to be about 100 billion, which was shocking to me. It actually seems quite low, given that, well, 8 billion of us are alive right now, which is about 8% of all humans that have ever existed, and we have a 500,000 year history. So it seems really small that in that amount of time we've only had 100 billion people. Well, when you think about it, it makes sense because it's only about the 1800s that we actually get about 1 billion people. In fact, the specific year I'll put right up here. And before then, we had significantly less people. For a long time, we had less people, and so it didn't add up really quickly until very recently. And so right now, it will only be about a few generations before we double that and get to 200 billion people. Now, part of the reason why that's interesting is because a lot of people think that it's really crazy that we're born right now when there's tons of technological progress. And in a lot of ways, it really is crazy that we're born right now. But when you look at it statistically, it's really not that insane we're born right now. In fact, if you were to be born as any random human in history, well, there's an 8% chance that you would be alive right now, especially if you include the amount of humans that are going to be alive in the future, which of course is going to be more, even if it isn't many more. That still means that well over 8% of all humans will live in a time where we have the technology or more advanced technology than we have right now. And so it's actually not that insane, statistically speaking, that we are born right now because 8% of all humans that have ever lived are alive right now. So why is this important for the point that I'm trying to make? Well, us as humans, as humanity as a whole, very simply and broadly speaking, have two potential futures in front of us. One of those is we win, and the other future is we lose. And I'm going to explain us winning first. So if we win, we take care of disease, we take care of nuclear war, we avoid a climate catastrophe, we avoid any pathogens, and anything that would kill us, anything that would wipe us out, we just win. We figure it out, it's not an issue. And because of that, it's very likely, especially if we look at the rate of technological progress in the past 200 years, that we're going to continue that rate, if not speed up faster. And even if it slows down, we're still going to make huge progress to the point where more than likely we are going to maybe unlock interplanetary travel or be able to create spaceships where we can persist on indefinitely. Or if we decided to stay on this planet, which isn't very likely itself, we would more than likely be able to figure out how to provide everyone with free or infinite or practically infinite energy, and we'd be able to figure out other things like desalination of water, and then what to do with our trash so that it doesn't just pile up everywhere. Whatever problems that we have, we would more than likely be able to overcome even if we stayed on this planet, which would give us until the expansion of the sun, whatever. But however we do it, if we win, if we figure out all of these problems, if we're able to provide people with enough energy and resources to be able to survive for a long period of time, then more than likely there will end up being hundreds of billions, if not trillions, if not tens of trillions of humans in the future, especially if we're clearly able to persist on a planet with 8 billion people. Who knows what the upper limit is, and if we're smart about it, we might be able to maximize that even if we stay on our planet. So if not hundreds of billions, then definitely trillions, if not tens of trillions, would be able to exist on this planet or interplanetarily in the future. And so what that means is that we would be in the first 1% or 0.1% of all humans that ever exist, which means that we would be very early. It already seems weird how early we are in a cosmic sense. The universe, relatively speaking, is very young compared to how old it is going to be. So I'm going to explain why that's confusing in just a minute. First, I'll tell you the scenario where we lose. And I don't think I need to get into details as to what that looks like. Basically, everyone or most people die. And there's a few theories as to how that might happen, but broadly speaking, I'll relate it to the Fermi paradox, which, if you don't know what that is this idea of, well, we are intelligent life, and there are other planets out there that are Earth-like. Where is the rest of the intelligent life in the universe? How come we haven't met aliens, basically? And there are a lot of theories for why we haven't yet, and one of those theories is the Great Filter theory, meaning that once a society becomes advanced enough, that they just implode in on themselves. Because a society that might even have 1,000-year head start on us would more than likely be so technologically advanced and sophisticated that they would have interplanetary travel and they would have went and colonized other places in the universe. That's the theory, at least. So one of the explanations for why we haven't seen any aliens out there is that civilization, once it becomes advanced enough, just implodes in on itself. And there might be many different reasons for that. One of those reasons being that we have monkey brains and we still have monkey hardware, so that our greed or our narcissism or just our stupidity is enough to get us to destroy everything. Because we are just monkeys with nuclear weapons, and that's pretty scary. And we have the capability of wiping out everybody, and as technology becomes more advanced, the more likely it is that fewer and fewer people would be capable of that. Maybe even down to the point where a single person would be able to create a bioweapon or some kind of bomb or whatever it might be that would actually destroy all of humanity. And it takes just one crazy person to be able to wipe out everybody. And we know how many crazy people there are out there, so that's kind of scary. So we have scenario 1 and we have scenario 2 laid out. Scenario 1, we win interplanetary travel, trillions of humans exist in the future. Scenario 2, we lose, we succumb to nuclear war or some kind of disease or something that wipes out most, if not all of us, and that means we're likely getting pretty close to that. Even if we last another 1,000 years, it's not far off and there won't be that many more humans that exist. Now, if you were to make a bet on which one of those was most likely to occur, you would bet that we are reaching a great filter. And the reason why that is because just how I explained that if we win, that means that we are more than likely in the first few billion humans that ever exist, the first 0.1% or 1%, whatever, the very first batch of humans that ever exist. That's where we would be right now. And that's unlikely to be the case. We could only expect, as any random individual, to just be typical. We could only expect, mathematically and statistically speaking, that we are just an average person in an average time, in an average society, in an average place in human history. And if the Great Filter theory is true, that's where we are. That's where we are. We're likely getting very close to that because the technology is advancing so rapidly that we are nearing a point, and we already are at a point where the technology exists to wipe everyone out in a single afternoon. We likely don't need to go much further before we actually reach that Great Filter and we implode in on ourselves. We're probably pretty close to that point as it stands right now. And if scenario 2, the Great Filter, is what ends up happening, then we are actually in a very typical time in human history. And that if you were to be born as any human in history, you were more likely to be born right now than you are to have been born during any time in history. It seems that we're actually going to max out and then fall. We're going to max out maybe around 9 billion and then fall. There seems to be reason for us to believe that, and so that means that right now is actually the most likely time for us to be born and to be alive. And if there's a Great Filter, that means that we would be in maybe the last 10% of humans, or even if we're in the last 50% of humans, or even in the first 30% of humans that exist, that is significantly more likely than in scenario 1, where trillions of humans are able to persist because we're able to live for a very long time and sustain a high population. Where in that scenario, we would be the first 0.1% or 1%, whatever it is, we would be very early on in human history, which is significantly more unlikely than being in the first 30% or 50% or even last 10% of humans that exist. And that is a very pessimistic view, but if you were to be making a bet as to what was going to happen, statistically speaking, you would definitely bet on the Great Filter being what happens. And you would want to get in that bet now because there are a lot of optimistic people out there that are hoping so much for scenario one that they would put their entire life savings on it. And you could get really filthy rich, even if you can't do anything with that money. Now, what do I think personally? Do I think that we're nearing a great filter and that we're going to implode in on ourselves soon and we are actually at a very typical time to be alive? I don't know. I have no idea. I have no way of knowing. And there are a few problems with that argument anyways. One of those problems is that I'm only looking at anatomical human history, so for the past 500,000 years, which is a very short amount of time if you take into account the amount of time that life has existed on this planet, which might be 3.2 or 3.7 billion years, something in that range, which is an extremely long amount of time, and to only consider the last 500,000 years of anatomically modern human existence might not be fair whatsoever. It might only be appropriate for us to consider all the way back to when eukaryotes or multicellular organisms started to exist, or even before that, when single-celled organisms began to exist. There's no reason for us to assume that we right now should be considered as separate from that, especially when that is where we came from and what we are made out of. Not to mention, we aren't even considering all of the other animals that exist on this planet, and so if we're only considering ourselves as anatomically modern humans, that's a very probably inappropriate assumption to make when we should more than likely be considering all life forms that exist on this planet, because we have no reason to believe that we might not have been born as a deer or as a bacterium or whatever it might be. And there's also the possibility that maybe we really are in the first 0.1% of humans that will ever exist. Maybe that is where we are in human history, because somebody had to be, somebody will have had to have been, and maybe that is us, and there's no reason for us to believe that that isn't who we are. And so there are a lot of issues with these arguments, but that doesn't mean that it's not an interesting thought exercise. And could it be potentially true, which is very pessimistic, but there are so many issues with that argument that I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. We could have a very exciting future ahead of ourselves because we have the potential to do that. We have the skills, we have the technology, we have the rate of growth, we have the resources, we have everything we need to try to make sure that we have a fantastic future for every single human, all trillions of them that will exist in the future. It would be a shame if we let that slip from our grasp. And so if we are in the 0.01% of all humans that have ever existed and will ever exist, then we have a very great responsibility ahead of us, because we are the ones who decide what the future of the next tens of trillions of humans will be. And that's exciting, but it's also frightening. And so, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to take the bet that we are reaching a great filter. Rather, I'm going to use this as motivation to try to set our future selves up as best as we possibly can. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far. I appreciate you. Have a good day.